everyone, it's Shel C from PaperOcotilloStudio, and today I'm sharing with you my 5x7 canvas panel with mixed media collage that I did for day 14 of the 100-day project that I'm doing. And I wanted to mess around with alcohol ink in a way that Nancy Curry was doing on the Stencil Girl Talk blog. She had written an article about this way of applying alcohol ink that was really interesting. And then Peg had read that and she was playing with it on our live stream last week. And then I decided I wanted to do it. So basically, the one that I'm doing is this is plastic bag, like from the store, and I cut it into some pieces. Um, it's crinkly, it's thin, it's just plastic, right? Just junk that you would throw away or recycle. And you just lay it down and put some colors of alcohol ink on it. This one has vent holes, and so the alcohol ink keeps going through to my mat. But it's interesting in a way that you can apply ink with it, and you'll see me do it in a bit. I made a few different ones, and you need to set them aside to dry naturally. Of course, this being a plastic bag, not really conducive to drying it with a heat tool or anything, so you just kind of wait. I have a mister bottle that's filled with alcohol, and then also I have some alcohol ink sprays that I made myself in those same mister bottles. Another thing that I wanted to do, which I didn't use today, but I just left it in because you'll probably see them come up, is to use some stencils on plastic. This is Duralar, which you can buy in a pad to use for art stuff, but you could just use packaging if you wanted to, if you had, the clear plastic left over from a piece of packaging. But I'm just putting the stencils down and then putting alcohol inks over them and letting them dry with the stencil on it. I've done this before and it makes for an interesting design and a clear translucent piece that you can then apply over something else to change the pattern. I'm sure I'll be using them sometime in this 100-day project, so you'll see them, but this is how you make them, is you just put alcohol inks over. I'm using my little mister to spread the alcohol inks, and it's pretty wet, but it dries fairly quickly because of course alcohol evaporates quickly. So I just set them aside for later and pulled them apart later. So something that I also did was make more collage paper. Of course, the stencils are dirty because they've got that alcohol on them. And so I just sprayed the dirty stencils and laid them down on paper, and it transferred the stencil design in the reverse in the colors of alcohol ink that I used onto just plain paper. So I have several of those too to use in the future for my collages. So here's my 5x7 panel, and I wanted to add some more gesso, and I wanted this to be textured. So I'm going to apply the gesso with a palette knife, and I'm just blending a little bit of cobalt teal in because I didn't want it completely white. And it does leave a texture, but I end up adding more texture to it. So, it kind of gets covered up. But the panel didn't seem very well gessoed. It does come pre-gessoed, but it just seemed weird. So then I took the piece of plastic that's now dry and I spritzed the panel with alcohol, and then I put the plastic over it. And most of that you see there ends up getting covered up because, of course, this is a mixed media collage, it has lots of layers. But it was sure cool. And I ended up using up the rest of the alcohol ink on some plain paper. So isn't that cool? It makes such an interesting texture, and you get the different colors coming through. Like you can see some of that more olive green and some teal. It's really cool. I liked the way it came out. But I wanted to make a textured piece, so I decided to get out some light molding paste and put that through a stencil to give me a little bit more texture. And that kind of covered up most of that cool pattern. Because this is a mask style stencil, instead of getting the lines, I'm getting the background of the lines, which is cool too. but it did serve to kind of cover up that cool background that I made with the alcohol ink. Like, oh, bummer. But oh well, we move on. We keep messing with it. We go and do more things to it until we're happy. So that's how mixed media works. So I dried this with the heat tool. I didn't show that, just to get it dry enough for me to continue on. And I've got the alcohol ink out again in the same colors, pretty much, I think, that were in the background, greens and teals and those type of colors. And I'm letting the alcohol drip through the texture paste, which leaves a really interesting texture. You will see some close-ups at the end, and one corner of this, I just left it exactly like it turned out. The middle section got stuff on it, but you'll be able to see what it looked like just after this step is just goes down into the grooves of all that texture and makes pattern and interest. I think it's cool. Each layer on this one, sometimes I hear from people often that, oh, they're watching me do what I do, which is mixed media and layering, and they freak out when put when I don't stop when they think I should. They want me to just leave it the way it was, and then I put something over the top. And this time, I actually was kind of like that. It's like, oh, that original alcohol ink background was really cool. Then the next layer with the inks through the texture was cool, and then I just but each one of these to me is still a background until there's something to really look at in the middle, or something that's going to draw your eye. So I decided to bring in some acrylic ink, and I looked at my color wheel just to make sure, but orange and green blue are across from each other on the color wheel, and so they're complementary colors. So that was a good choice, was to use the the orange. What I was having a little bit of trouble with is that the orange is too translucent. It wasn't staying orange. It was blending with the alcohol ink in the background and becoming kind of a neutral color, which I wanted it to be more orange. So I kept adding in. I started with white, and then I added some orange, and then I added in some more white because I was trying to get the orange to stay more orange. But it kind of wanted to change into uh, just a neutral, kind of a muddy color. And when you're making all these layers and things aren't really necessarily all the way dry, I mean, I've dried the surfaces with the heat tool, but I'm not going to wait around for it to dry naturally. So um, sometimes I do get blending. I know that alcohol ink isn't completely dry, and the molding paste is kind of like a sponge. It's almost foamy, this particular molding paste, which is the golden one. And so it's absorbing fluid, and then also absorbing the alcohol ink as time passes. So that's just something to think about. But I like this layer. I think that turned out pretty cool after I put some more of the acrylic ink over the top in certain places, and um, started my focal area in the middle of the canvas. So now I want to do some collage because it's mixed media, but it's not collage yet because I didn't glue anything to it, right? So I grabbed out some different papers, teals and oranges and greens, and some neutral to do a little bit of collage. Because, yeah, that's what I like to do. So then I'm tearing up my pieces. I'm laying them out to see what they will look like, combining orange and green and teal pieces, little torn pieces. That little piece of napkin ended up destroying itself and didn't get to stay on there, but it was really cool. It was exactly the right colors, just soaked into this cheap kind of napkin that you use on your table. And I wished it would have survived, but it disintegrated, so I had to pull it off and put something else there. But I also have this rice paper that has some Sumi ink doodles on it that I use, which kind of inform what I end up doing in the end, those kind of floral shapes. I decided to use fluid matte medium, and you don't see me use this very often because I generally like the gel formula of glues because I like it to be a little bit thicker. But in this case, I wanted to be able to press the paper down into the texture so that I didn't lose the texture and so that all the paper is fully adhered to the piece. So I'm using very thin papers, rice paper, deli paper, those types. Maybe there might be one piece of, I think it's almost all rice paper actually. There might be a couple pieces of uh, what do you call it, text weight, like from my printer, maybe. But most of it was real thin, flimsy paper, so I was able to easily press it into the texture. And I'm using my baby wipe to do that. So I put a little bit of the fluid matte medium where I'm going to put the paper. Then I put the paper over the top and I press it down a little bit with the brush. And then I go and take the wet baby wipe and press down in it, and it gets down into the grooves of all that texture. And you will see that in the close-ups at the end. It's hard to see at this point with it being as far away as it is from the camera, but it definitely worked to get all my lightweight paper down into the areas of texture and make sure it was all really glued down. So had a lot of fun with that. It's very textury, and I just keep adding things. I'll add another layer too. So yeah, lots of texture on this one, which is what I wanted to do for day 14. I set out to make something textural and I ended up with something textural, so it all worked out. So then after all that was dry, I dried it with the heat tool again. I took some embossing ink and this embossing powder from Emerald Creek. They make a lot of very interesting blended embossing powders. This one's called Charred Gold. And it actually, when it's all dry, kind of, to me, looks almost copper. But it is gold. I think it's just because it's reflecting the orange. But on the piece, as I'm looking at it, it looks quite a bit copper, which is cool because copper would be the exact perfect color to put on here. I just didn't have any copper embossing powder. So this one is a blend. It's got chunky pieces, less chunky pieces. Just an interesting embossing powder. Embossing powder is kind of back as a trend. It has been in the last couple years, and several known artists that you would recognize, like Seth Apter, has their own line of embossing powder. I think his is made by Emerald Creek, but it's his own designed embossing powders. So then I wanted to have something kind of as a focal image there in that section, and so I decided to cut a little flower shape that's reminiscent of the doodles out of a piece of lime green paper that's it was a painted paper, and put that on with a little bit of orange in the middle. Then I added a little bit more embossing powder. Going back and forth here, I have a dry brush and I'm brushing off sections and then coming back and adding more and until I'm happy with it. So the embossing powder also highlights the raised portions of the texture in the background. I'm also adding a little bit of lines with my Posca pen, which of course is an acrylic paint pen that writes over anything. And I just keep going back and forth until I'm happy with the embossing powder look. This will be sealed with three coats of spray varnish, acrylic spray varnish. So all that embossing powder and everything will be sealed onto the piece and won't flake off. That's how I do it. I do it outside with spray because I just don't like brush on varnish. Not a fan. So I hope you guys are enjoying this project. Give those alcohol ink techniques a try and maybe try using some embossing powder in your mixed media art. It's always fun and different to try something else that you probably already have, but just don't get out very often like me. I have a lot of embossing powders and I don't use it that often, but it really enhanced this piece. Hard to see on the video, I know, but the close-ups will give you an idea of how that turned out. And I added some white splatters and some white highlights on my little flower. Off camera, I did end up adding some leaves to my flower. I just felt like it needed it. It happened later and I didn't turn the camera on, but it's that same paper, that same rice paper with the greens and teals on it. And I just cut some little leaf shapes out and glued them down on there and added the black and white Posca with that. So super fun and easy project. I had a good time with this one, and I will see you in a couple days with another one or something else. I don't know, something. I am doing these little mixed media collages every day, but I'm not filming them all. But you can follow me on Instagram at PaperOcotilloStudio, at PaperOcotilloStudio, if you would like to see my daily production of these pieces. So that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.